All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Chavis, and I am the I am the Outreach and Education Librarian for Region 1 of the Network at the National Library of Medicine. I'm going to be the moderator for today's session, which is how to initiate, support, and evaluate a social work practicum student in your library. Lessons learned from a statewide initiative in New Jersey. From here, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera because I've been having some issues today. All right, and moving on. First, before we get started, I want to share some information with you before we get into our presentation. Everyone in this meeting has been muted to limit background noise, but we do welcome your questions and comments at any time. Please use the chat function to share your comments and to submit questions that you have for our speakers. I will be providing production assistance throughout the session and keeping an eye out for your posts. And we'll save all of your questions as they come in for our speakers, and we can address them at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, by registering for this webinar, all attendees did agree to abide by the NNLM Code of Conduct to foster a respectful and professional learning environment. Closed captioning has been enabled and is available by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the icon, click on the three dots and you should see it there, and then select closed caption. We are recording today's session if you didn't hear that notice. And when the recording is ready, it usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks, but it can take up to 30 days. We will post that on our YouTube channel. And lastly, please be sure to fill out your evaluations. Use the link that I'll be sharing in the chat towards the end of the session. This will be used to get your MLACE. Your feedback really matters to us. So whether you need a CE or not, please fill it out. I personally, I look at my evals because I want to see what I can do better for you all. And I'm going to now tell you a little bit about the NNLM because some of you may be first-time attendees and may not know much about us. So let's get into that, and you can move to the next slide. So the NNLM is the network at the National Library of Medicine, and it was established in 1965. The NNLM is funded by the National Library of Medicine and is the outreach and education arm of the National Library of Medicine. The National Library of Medicine is an institute at the National Institutes of Health. The NLM is the world's largest biomedical library, and it produces information resources such as PubMed, clinicaltrials.gov, and MedLife Plus. So the goal of the NNLM is to advance the progress of medicine and improve public health by providing U.S. health professionals with equal access to biomedical information and improving individuals' access to information to enable them to make informed decisions about their health. Next slide. So the network operates out of 7 regional medical libraries, or RMLs. I'm out of one of them. Region 1 is University of Maryland, Baltimore currently. The RMLs offer training and funding opportunities to support equal access to biomedical information. Our work primarily focuses in 3 areas, which are training, network access, and funding. So we offer access to the NNLM network of libraries and other organizations. We offer free training to librarians, health professionals, and the general public. And we offer funding for health-related projects such as health information outreach, health equity, and the digital divide. So from here, I am going to pass it over to Beth, who is going to introduce you to today's speakers.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
I know our whole group is excited to be here today to talk about a statewide project that we did in New Jersey and some lessons learned that can help all of you with trying to plan or carry out similar projects in your areas. So, for the session today, we're going to talk about the common tasks of library based social work practicum students and how a student could help in your own libraries. We're going to talk about some barriers and challenges to successful placements and strategies for trying to overcome these. We're going to share lessons learned from our statewide initiative in New Jersey, and we're going to share some information and resources with you that can be helpful in your own states and regions. So we have 7 of us as part of this group, and I'm going to introduce everybody quickly, and they're all going to wave if you can see the different presenters. So first is Sarah Johnson. And Sarah is adjunct faculty at University of Illinois Champaign's School of Information Sciences. She's also co-author of the book with me called Creating a Person-Centered Library: Best Practices for Supporting High Needs Patrons. And she hosts a podcast called Library Social Work. Next is Jennifer Nelson. She's the state librarian at the New Jersey State Library. Next on our list of presenters is Karen Perry. She's library director at East Brunswick Public Library. Next, we have David Perez, who's the social work and diversity services manager or the library social worker at Long Branch Free Public Library in New Jersey. And he also served as practicum liaison for this project and practicum instructor at Rutgers University School of Social Work. We also have Nancy Schley. Nancy is the Associate Director of Practicum Learning at Rutgers University School of Social Work. Next, we have Charles Centio, who is Associate Professor at Rutgers University School of Communication and Information, and he is a social worker and librarian and served as the practicum instructor for this project through Rutgers University School of Social Work. And then I'm last. I'm Beth Waller. I'm a researcher and consultant for Beth Waller Consulting. I'm affiliated research faculty with UNC Charlotte School of Social Work, co-author of the book with Sarah I mentioned earlier, and also co-host of a podcast called Surviving the Stacks. So we're going to tell you a little bit about the project that we carried out in New Jersey called the New Jersey Social Work Informed Library Services Project. This project was carried out with lots of different partners. So it was led by the New Jersey State Library in collaboration with Rutgers University School of Social Work, with Beth Weller Consulting, and Long Branch Free Public Library. I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of background. I'll move through this quickly so that most of our time today is spent talking about the actual project and recommendations or sort of lessons learned that can inform all of you in the audience. But I want to give just a little bit of background about social work in the library. So the psychosocial or social service related needs of library patrons have been increasing in libraries across the country in the US and internationally over really the last several decades, but especially in the last decade and since the beginning of the pandemic. The social service related needs of public library patrons, and really we're seeing these same needs in other kinds of libraries, such as some academic libraries, some school libraries, special libraries as well. But our focus for this project was on public libraries. We're seeing that the top areas of patron need tend to be either unsafe or unstable housing or homelessness or houselessness. In some libraries, we see people who are sort of traditionally in that homeless group, kind of chronically unhoused, living on the streets or living in shelters. In other libraries, they may see people who don't necessarily fit that sort of chronic homelessness group. They're not living on the street, but they have unstable or unsafe housing and are couch surfing or living with friends or family. Other top areas of need in library patrons include mental health problems, substance use problems, and in some libraries, we're seeing high rates of overdoses that are happening in the library space, and then also poverty-related needs or financial strain. These kinds of needs are impacting libraries in a lot of different ways. Sometimes we see patrons who are actually coming in, and these needs are impacting their information needs, and they're actually asking for information and resources. In other cases, we're seeing that these kinds of challenges are impacting their behavior in the library. And these needs, as I mentioned, have been increasing since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. They're not really expected to go down anytime soon because we really lack sufficient resources for people who have these needs in in our communities around the country. And although the frequency of the needs varies based on the library and the community that library is in, we see these same unmet patron needs no matter whether we're looking at an urban library, a suburban library, or a rural library. So, urban libraries have received a lot of attention around these needs, but we're seeing very similar needs in rural and suburban libraries as well. Because of these growing social service related needs, many libraries are either adding social workers or are thinking about adding social workers or, are wanting to add social workers if they have the resources or ability to do so. And there's a growing movement to partner social work with libraries across the United States as well as some other countries such as Canada and Australia. There are lots of different models, so social work in the library looks different in different libraries based on lots of different factors. And I'll talk about some ways that social workers help in libraries, but one thing I want to point out now is that in libraries that have added social work, even libraries who've added social workers on staff, this isn't to say that the library is becoming a social service organization, and instead they're looking at how social workers can help with meeting those social service related information needs of patrons and customers. And really it's a way of thinking about relationships as the new reference collection, which is a phrase that came from the book Whole Person Librarianship by Zetterval and Now. So again, social workers do lots of different things in libraries. Social workers are trained to work across what we call the micro to macro continuum of services. Micro means that we focus on individuals and what individuals need. And then macro means we focus on the organization as a whole or the community. So some sample activities that social workers do in libraries at the micro level include working with individual patrons to try to assess their needs, to try to help provide information, refer to other organizations, do some sorts of case management or service coordination to help make sure that people can actually get services at these other partnering organizations, intervene in crises, or help advocate for an individual's needs. At the meso level, which is in between micro and macro, meso means groups, focused on small groups. Social workers in libraries can do things like facilitate programming or workshops for the public on topics related to social service needs. Some library social workers facilitate or organize non-clinical or mutual aid support groups or book groups on topics related to social service needs or facilitate staff training. And at the macro level or the larger organizational or community level, library social workers often focus on either analyzing policies in the library to look for ways that policies might impact different groups in different ways. Sometimes they advocate at the community level for different services that are needed or work as part of task forces or community work groups to identify gaps in the community and try to help address those gaps through partnerships and other organizations. Social workers tend to be a good fit for libraries because of a lot of different things. One is that, again, we're trained to work across that micro to macro continuum, which really fits well in a library environment because libraries do work at the community level, they do work with individual patrons and sort of everything in between. Social workers are trained for working in what we call generalist environments, which means all different populations, all different groups, all different age groups, which again fits library patron populations who can be anybody from any group and any age level or any age. Social workers are also trained to do assessment and to look for and attempt to address different challenges that might be the root cause of whatever the presenting issue is. So social workers might work with somebody based on what they're asking for help for now, but we also are always looking for and trying to assess what other challenges there may be that may be causing barriers or problems for that person. We work to foster independence and are really wary of things that might create dependence on the library. So as we're working with patrons who have different needs, we're trying to think about how we can help them be independent in the long run. We are trained to use clinical skills even if we're not working in clinical environments. So that really helps with working with individuals in crisis or trying to engage people from lots of different populations. Many social workers are trained in understanding the stages of change, which means how likely somebody is to be ready to address a certain barrier or challenge in their lives. And we're trained in many cases in something called motivational interviewing, which is about how to move people through those stages of change to try to help get them ready to make changes in their lives. And we're also trained in brief interventions, which fit a library context very well. Now, I do want to say that different social workers have different training and different strengths. So some social workers are stronger in some of these areas than others. Libraries are a really great fit for social workers because libraries are accessible to everybody, work really hard to be a stigma free environment, to be really inclusive, to provide information about a variety of different resources and to meet people's needs, to really truly meet people where they're at. And libraries are that true generalist environment that have lots of different populations, lots of different people, which is a great place for social workers to practice. So social workers tend to be a good fit for a library. Libraries tend to be a good fit for a social worker, and we really complement each other. We also have overlapping professional values. So both libraries and social workers really value service to the community, privacy and confidentiality, making sure people have access to accurate information. We both really value respecting individuals' rights to make choices for themselves. We both value professionalism, integrity, and we're both advocates for social justice. Although we share many values, we also have some places where we really complement one another well. So, libraries focus on serving the whole public and making sure that everybody has access to resources in the library. Social workers have a professional mission to focus on serving the most vulnerable. And one of the things we're seeing in libraries now is that many libraries are stressed and stretched thin because people who have lots of social service related needs need extra support and are often taking extra time that staff may not have. And that's where a social worker can really come in and help because our professional mission is to spend our time and energy helping people that have those vulnerabilities and complex needs. There are lots of different existing social work library collaborations. There's a map that is kept as updated as possible on the wholepersonlibrarianship.com website. And you can see here where across the country we have student interns in the blue sites, full-time social workers employed by libraries in the sort of red or hot pink sites. Orange little dots are places where we have social workers doing office hours in libraries, and then the green ones are where we have part-time social workers placed in libraries. And then the black little arrows or dots are places where we have some other kinds of social work and library collaborations. Just briefly, lots of libraries are interested in students. And for libraries that are interested in having social workers, often having students or hosting practicum students is a first step into adding a social worker in that library. There are lots of benefits of using social work students in libraries. One is that it's inexpensive, frequently, doesn't take any financial resources at all. In some places, there may be some stipends paid, or there may be payment for a supervisor, or there may be some sort of small expense, but it's much less expensive than trying to hire a social worker. Students can work across that micro to macro continuum I mentioned. Again, you have to consider kind of where the student is coming from, where they are in their education, but technically they can work across that continuum with individuals, groups, and the organization or in the community. And often students can be used to gather data or do a needs assessment that then can help that library put together a funding proposal or make an argument for trying to hire or contract with a social worker. Challenges, though, with having students are that there's frequent turnover. A student is typically in the library only 1 or 2 semesters, depending on the school they're coming from. There can be gaps between student placements. So sometimes a school may not have a student to place at your library every time consistently. Students have to have time to orient to the library setting, so they need to really understand the library and what social work looks like in a library. The tasks and activities that they can do varies on their education level, their skills, and their abilities. Students have to have a supervisor that's a social worker, and so there's some work that has to be done sometimes depending on the university to find a social work supervisor for the student in a library. Because the library typically does not have a social worker on staff, there can be some extra coordination that has to happen between the library supervisor, an external social work supervisor, and the university. And sometimes the supervisor in the library needs extra support because, again, often in many libraries, there's not a social worker. So the person who's supervising the day-to-day activities of the student in the library might need some extra support and training to make sure that they're able to supervise a social work student. I'm going to turn things over to Jennifer Nelson to talk about the project we did in New Jersey.
Thank you, Beth. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you here today. We undertook this project as an outgrowth of some of the work we did during the pandemic. Those of you that work in libraries remember that the IMLS had lots of Recovery Act funds to distribute, and we spent a significant portion of that on providing support to libraries around digital literacy. As the pandemic started to end, we took a step back and said, well, what would really be most helpful for libraries? It seemed like the narrow scope of digital literacy was too narrow for the needs that we were seeing emerging from COVID. So we had great partners in both Rutgers University and the Long Branch Public Library. So Nancy and David, who are here today. David has been doing the work for a long time, and Rutgers has been in the business again for quite a while. So we decided that focusing on the more general needs of a library patron in the social service area would be helpful. We really wanted to demystify for libraries what working with a social worker was like, or with a social work student. It was a project that one of the things we found is that the timing for our funding didn't match the timing for the placement of students very well. So we typically don't get our budget until June or July, and social workers, students, interns are placed in the spring. So it's kind of a disconnect there. So our project actually began in 22-23, and then we piloted it in the 23-24 academic year. So we were hopeful that by doing this pilot project, we would be able to help libraries understand where a social work, either a full-time social worker or a social work intern, could fit in their array of services. The slide lists several of the characteristics of the pilot project. I'll just pull out of a few of them. One of the things that was important to me is that we provide a paid placement for students. For me, that's an equity issue. It's really the students who are better off financially, who are able to support themselves with the costs that involved with doing an internship, whether it's childcare or transportation, not being able to work at their regular jobs and that kind of thing. So that was critical for me as something that we do to ensure that we had equitable access to a range of diverse social work students. Beth and her colleagues did some wonderful training sessions for both the library supervisors and for the students, and wrote handbooks for the students and the library supervisors. I will put on in the chat box a link to the supervisor library task manual, library supervisor task manual, which I think is just exceptionally well done in terms of activities as well as policies and practices. We did host throughout the year, the academic year, 2 community of practice meetings, one for the library supervisors of social work students so that they could develop a cohort and share with one another and know they were not alone in the challenges they were facing, and to get support from one another. And then we had the second one, which was libraries that were interested in hosting in the future. We had about 30 libraries express interest in participating in the project for a variety of reasons. We ended up placing, I think it was about 10 students, 10 or 11 students. One of the things, so I'll go back to that in a moment. We did do an evaluation. We engaged with the Walter Rand Institute for community studies, maybe at Rutgers Camden campus to do an evaluation of the project. And we do have that available if you're interested. And I'll put my email in the chat box. We don't have it posted online because our website's undergoing revision at the moment. Let's see. So choosing the libraries, our hope had been to be able to support a wide range of libraries across the state, but the reality was the students were really centered in that central Jersey area because of their connection with Rutgers and New Brunswick. So many of the applicants we had were from a high need area, South Jersey, but we weren't able to fill those. On the other hand, some of those libraries have actually adopted social workers, or adopted, as a nice way to say it, adopted social workers as part of their staff complement anyway. So we were grateful to be able to work with Nancy and her team on having this happen. Between us, I think we ran into several wrinkles in terms of administering the program from a funding perspective, as well as from the student success perspective, but I will let Nancy touch on that.
Okay, thank you. Good to be here. So I'll just stick with this map just for a minute or two. So the New Jersey State Library at the outset of the pilot project did a broad reach throughout the state of New Jersey to library directors and staff who might be interested in hosting interns. And you can see from the map, we had it was actually 36 libraries responded to that initial ask. And what we do then is we talk with each library director to hear about their interests, their availability, the services they provide, preliminary ideas about tasks that they might assign to an intern. And we had 13 students placed in 12 libraries in 3 counties. And as you can see, one student was bilingual English and Polish, another bilingual English and Cantonese, and we had 4 students bilingual English and Spanish. And so this is just a broad context. So then we move into the matching process. So we have a very large program, but we have a very personal touch with all of our students and with our partner agencies. And so I spoke with all of the libraries interested in hosting interns. Again, got some preliminary ideas about tasks that they might assign. And then on a parallel track, I spoke with individual students who I thought would be a good match for a particular site based on location, based on interest, based on the level of the student. And so we have this matching process. And so once we make a match between a student and a specific library site, the student sends their resume and they have an interview. It's like a job interview. They meet with the library director and maybe another staff person to, again, discuss their interests, their experience, ideas about tasks that they would be completing at the site. So we want it to be a good match for both the library staff and for the student. And so we have this matching process. If for some reason one student, it wasn't a good fit with a particular library, we would then refer another candidate. So we don't refer 5 students to one library and say, pick the best one. We have a very dedicated matching process that we work with. And each partner, we have an open dialogue with them. We have an ongoing dialogue with them about tasks and what students need in terms of learning about social services. They're in a learning role, right? They're interns. They don't come in with an expertise. They may have some experience in different settings. Where there were many different projects that got off the ground based on the students' role in the library. And so students come in, they're eager to learn, they want to contribute, they have fresh eyes, but they need guidance and direction from the library staff.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we help prepare those students, but first, how we helped prepare the library supervisors. We will provide links to this later, but if you want to scan these QR codes, this will give you a link to the free handbook for the library supervisors as well as the students. And I'm just going to briefly go over the content of each of those handbooks. I will say too that we did conduct, and I think Jen mentioned this, we did conduct 4 trainings over the summer of 2023, 3 with the library task supervisors. So we met with them online and provided this handbook for them in June, July, and August of 23. And then we met with the students in August of 23. So the library task supervisor's handout basically provides a baseline knowledge of kind of social work 101. It also goes over the students' educational requirements and the competencies that they need to attain prior to graduation and through this placement, if possible. We delineate the differences between undergraduate level social work students and graduate level students. We go through the different types of activities that students can do at the libraries. We talk about the importance and how to orient the students and prepare them adequately, as well as the librarians themselves for this partnership. We talk about evaluating the students' performance. It also goes through social work ethics, values, and we provide a sample sample job descriptions as well as a glossary of social work terms. In the student's handbook, this is kind of the reverse or the inverse, is we provide kind of public librarianship 101. So we outline the ALA Code of Ethics, and we also talk about how trauma-informed approaches or principles can be applied to public libraries. We go through the challenges that students can anticipate in these placements, and then things to be aware of, their workspace requirements and the tools that they need for their job. We discuss their learning agreements and the kinds of activities that they can do at the library, as well as how to measure outcomes of the placement. I believe it goes back to Jen.
All right, little flaky over here, sorry. So we did the monthly library supervisor group meetings and built the communities of practice. And I think having the safe space was really helpful on several different levels for the supervisors, both for learning best practices for supporting students, for integrating students into the library, which in some cases was a little more difficult than you'd think. It's not just like having another staff member or a community intern coming into the library. It's a little different than that. But their shared experience, I think, really created a bonding experience that allowed them to feel more comfortable with the work that they were doing and to feel empowered that the work they were doing is correct, if you will. They also, I know David, who will be speaking in a minute, will be also providing support to a lot of the library staff as the sort of resident expert in social workers and libraries in New Jersey. So really grateful to him for the role that he played with that. So, so yeah, the supervisor meetings felt important. They were well attended, and led, I think, people to feel very included in the project as opposed to operating out on the limb, if you will. So it's a good thing.
Hi, so I'll go over the different sources of support for students. And each school of social work has their own structure, but it follows this basic outline. So there is a practicum liaison who is available to library staff as well as to students, and they oversee the students' experience at the library. And they provide consultation to both supervisors and students. They meet with both the supervisor and the student together at least once during the semester. I provided some additional support to library staff and students during the semester. So there's a lot of support from the liaison and from me as the associate director of Practicum Learning and faculty person at Rutgers. In addition, there's a MSW Practicum supervisor who the students met with weekly, on a weekly basis. We do this virtually, and the supervisor provides the social work perspective. How do you engage patrons? How do you take initiative in the library? What sort of tasks might you do? And that's really in collaboration with the site supervisor, who is the task supervisor, who's on site at the library and is the person who's directly providing guidance and input to the student on a day-to-day basis. They assign tasks, they give guidance, and they're mentoring students. In all of these roles, we take a mentoring approach to working with students. So students have a lot of support.
As is with every social work, library social work initiative, and any type of social innovation, uh, we, you're always going to find that we have accomplishments and that we have challenges, which is actually healthy. And I would advise all of you to follow up with the evaluation that our state librarian suggested, Jen Nelson, because if you're research centered, then that's going to point you into the right direction. So a few sample tasks of students. What types of things? The most common question from library staff who are first taking on this role is, how do I properly utilize a social work intern when I'm not a social worker and it's not my profession? And so these are some of the sample tasks that students can engage in. Community engagement, 100%. Both professions share that value, and very high value. Information and referrals. This is your traditional referral librarian role. The library social work interns can absolutely move into that organically. Um, what one as a as a practicum liaison and a now practicum instructor for Rutgers University, one of the things that I always aim to highlight in the beginning of an academic year is this right here, is look for get to get to understand your community. Where are the housing opportunities, the affordable housing opportunities? Where are the food pantries? our communities are suffering from food insecurities, mental health services, immigrant services, which is actually an extremely hot topic right now because we have so many immigrants who are now scurrying around because they're afraid that they're going to be deported. We can actually address those issues at the library, and the social work students can actually be crucial in bridging the gap. Career search, um, supportive problem solving, and individual follow up. So this is what Beth was talking about when she talked about micro social work and working one on one with patrons. Small groups, like she talked about, is the meso social work piece, youth social skills, enhancing self esteem, health, wellness. Even a book club, which is a traditional library service, can be considered a meso social work setting. Developed updating resource manuals, which is great because it's literally a map that the intern is going to leave behind for the next intern. Because don't forget, the interns are only there for a very short period of time. These one academic year goes by so fast. Some more tasks, assisting with special events. Now, this is huge because libraries are traditionally engaged with their community when it comes to everything that is going on, whether it be Black History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Native American, which is what we're in right now, month. So we can get involved as a library and support other organizations and sort of collaborate and partner when it comes to community affairs, programming, outreach. We're inviting social service agencies into our library space, which is a free space, a safe space, into our libraries in order to reinforce what it is that they're doing. Information sessions, general inquiries, things like English as a second language. I mean, it's citizenship classes we have, and we have special projects like the diversity and equity training. These projects would be assigned by Nancy Slay, who would be the School of Social Work, would authorize these particular trainings for the students. It sort of enhances their internship experience, and it also offers them additional internship hours. Research for community work, needs assessments, which is huge, because we need to listen to what the community needs. We don't need to propose what the community needs. We need to listen to what it is that they actually need. And that's how we match our programming with our specific demographic. Data collection, grant writing is huge. And then you have our challenges. So we all have challenges. And this was the reason why we had the community, those focus groups in the beginning. And I love the way that this project actually ramped up, because it ramped up in a way that we didn't go live until we had those individual sessions with the library staff members in order to sort of to help them to feel confident about what they were going to do, instead of just saying, hey, here's an intern, go for it. So challenges, the challenges that we had specifically in this project was that we had more libraries interested than we had students. And I think that's because of the fact that the student concentration was in that New Brunswick or that Central Jersey area. But that can change. I'm optimistic that it will change, because Rutgers is the largest state public university in New Jersey. It is the state university of Jersey, and we're in 16 counties throughout New Jersey. So from the north to the south, we have Rutgers campuses. So I feel like moving forward, that will change. Limited resources and need to be creative with serving patrons. So the challenge was, like, how to do, and this is where the practicum supervisors and the liaisons come into the picture, because we're there to help facilitate all those questions and that sort of thing. The turnover of position leading community of practice, or requiring the community of practice to end earlier than anticipated. So this was a challenge that we faced, as a project, a collective project. It was just something that we faced. But like I said, we all have challenges, and we overcame those challenges. Libraries and students wanted more training and support that could be provided. So like I said, the academic year goes by so fast. And I think we did a lot of training, and support, but there was just a lot more that we could do. So we had more BASW students and MSW. So we had undergrads versus grad students. And what's the big difference? I'm going to tell you, there's not a huge difference, but one major difference is that what you'll find usually in a grad student is that you have a person who is a bit more hyper focused on obtaining that professional degree, and just really vetted into the field of profession. Many times undergraduates, they choose a profession when they come fresh out of high school, and then they stick with it, graduate in 4 years, and maybe they're thinking about something else. But when a student actually says, hey, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and I'm going to go to grad school, or I want to get my doctorate, and you kind of get a bit more buy-in. So that it's just a few differences, but we did get a lot of undergrad students. Some students needed significant guidance and supervision. For some students, this was their very first job ever. So this wasn't even just about library social work. It was about general work ethic and that sort of thing. Libraries requesting more clarification about student expectations. So everybody had questions. And this is why it was so important for the supervisors and liaisons to be involved. Dr. Charles Centio, who's on the call with us today, he was actively working as the instructor, and I was actively working as the liaison. Since then, I've moved into the instructor role as of this academic year, but together, me and Charles, we worked together to make sure that the libraries, the task supervisors, the students, and Nancy and the school social work understood exactly what was going on. The student challenges, they were trying to understand where they were. I mean, this is the library. This is not a traditional social work setting. How do I do this here? How do I practice social work here? Balancing multiple responsibilities, navigating, orientating the library environment while still learning social work. So, and this was the thing, they were just trying to understand, managing boundaries. So this was a big deal, and it's still a big deal, and it's a big deal in any social work setting. But these are students, so they're learning about boundaries, and then emotional challenges. Students still learning how to navigate these as young adults.
Okay, all right. I'm Karen Parry. I'm the director at the East Brunswick Public Library, and I'm here to tell the story about our library. And I am not a licensed social worker like David, so from the librarian's perspective, we forged a relationship with Rutgers to host a social work intern back in 2018. This was pre-COVID, obviously, and the internship that we offered was non-paid position. Our first intern, you still remember the first one. Her name was Sheena. She came to us very enthusiastic, and actually, she came to us at Rutgers. Had actually approached me. It was Dr. Centillo and Nancy Schley had approached me, and I knew nothing about social work, literally nothing. And I was intrigued, though, about the idea of hosting a social work intern in a library. I had never heard of anything like that before. At the time, the town was going through a demographic shift. We were seeing a large influx of immigrants, specifically from Egypt, from India, from Korea, Russia, specifically those group, and China, those groups. And we saw a need, immigrants that needed emotional support, connection to community resources to adjust into their new homes. They were looking for employment. They were looking for affordable housing. They were looking for health care. We also had a boom at the same time in senior housing. So we had a lot of seniors coming to the library asking for health insurance questions, health information questions. Many of them were lonely, needed help with bereavement issues. So our first intern, it was a pretty straightforward, narrow focus where she would specifically address people who needed help with food aid, homelessness, homeless support addiction, access to healthcare, housing, jobs, depression, literacy, and bereavement. That's what she told us. And that is what she focused on. And that went very, very well. And so the next year we hosted another intern. And then the next year, COVID hit. And right when COVID hit, we were like, what are we going to do now? Because the students came to us, they did their internship within the confines of the library walls, and what now? So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, how we handled that. But COVID brought with it many challenges to our program, specifically from what we were seeing from the community, that people came to us even more under emotional stress, anxiety, living with uncertainty, an unprecedented impact on the mental health of youth and families. We started seeing people really concerned coming in the library, things becoming more expensive, people worried about climate change, relationships, of course, an overwhelming youth mental health crisis caused by things like social media, immigrants and resettlement, and of course, aging and seniors. And of course, you all know that back in 2023, the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, raised awareness about a nationwide epidemic of loneliness, citing the disconnection fundamentally that affects our mental, physical, and social health. So we're really on the right track having a social worker in the library. And since then, the library has hosted interns over the years. They've all brought a creative spin to their programs, each reflective of their interests, their passions, and their personalities. The students work 15 hours a week as their in East Brunswick Library as their field placement site. Before COVID, it was exclusively in the library. After COVID, it was a hybrid mix of both library in the library time as well as online virtual time. So how does the program work for a library to host a student? Well, the way it works with us is that Rutgers, specifically Nancy Schlegel, selects and vets the students. They come to the library. We fill out an affiliation agreement with Rutgers to be a host site for their field education. The students are required to complete an emergency card and a background check. And then we create, and this is our favorite part, we create a flyer, or actually I should say they create a flyer of all the things that they would like to focus on. And I tell every student that comes to us, and we've had many of them since 2018, make this what you want. Make this your unique program. Put your unique spin. Tell the patrons what you would like to help them with. And we have a marketing coordinator at our library, and they design a flyer, and this is what it looks like. And this was Marcia, she was our one of our most recent interns. And you can see that Marcia chose to focus on mental health, college support services, women's health, housing aid, nutrition, employment, job stress, and drop-in sessions. And she had her mix of virtual and in-library hours. And we always also include a little notation in bright red: if this is an emergency, please call 911. And we do indicate that Marcia is a student from Rutgers, so people know that it is not a licensed social worker. What does the library do? Like, what is our role in this program? We are really the host and the interface and go between the student and Rutgers and the licensed social worker, who is David Perez from the Long Branch Public Library. Our librarians also play a part. We can't forget the role that they play, because the librarian, and I came to appreciate this as I learned more and more about social work. There is definitely, and you talked about already, that intersection between what librarians do and what social workers do. And our librarians played a big part in educating the intern. In fact, I made the intern sit at the reference desk. I made them go through our health portal. We have a proprietary health portal that lists all community resources. So they learn all about where to find healthcare and domestic abuse and alcohol, places for alcohol assistance, a whole myriad of resources that are available in the community. And so the librarians play a big part in that. We have a marketing coordinator that I mentioned. He does all the social media. And we work with the student when they're in the library to have a designated space where they either sit when they don't have appointments, or where they sit and they wait to meet pre-assigned appointments, or people connect with them through their Rutgers email. And Chris Barnes, who's our marketing coordinator, makes a big table sign. And here's, I don't know if you can see this one. This is well, you can't really see too well, but this is a recent one. It's it's a 12 by 18 sign. It has exactly their flyer. And we always tell the students, as soon as, you meet with your patron, obviously move to a quiet area within the library so that the patron is respected with privacy. And the types of questions that we've had, and these are real, and I always ask the students, make sure you keep track of the questions so I know. We've had people help with immigration services, patrons looking for free or low cost legal services, asylum, food pantries, patrons looking for jobs, how to find a job, how to build a resume, how to find career choices. Affordable housing is enormous. Volunteer opportunities in the community, support groups for ADHD and depression. We've connected people to the Middlesex County Office of Workforce and Career Development to learn about the free services that they offer. We've helped people, food insecurity is huge, so local food pantries, affordable housing, domestic abuse, and low-cost transportation, the list goes on. But those are just some real examples of the types of questions that we address. Now, the challenges, and David already touched on a lot of them, but I can't say this enough. Librarians are not social workers, and that's an important thing to recognize, because I came to appreciate in doing this over the years how complex and how serious this project is, and the profession and the types of questions. So it is really important that any library that wants to do this needs to foster professional relationships with the local universities and professional social workers like David Perez, like Dr. Centillo at Rutgers, who's also a licensed social worker, as well as with your universities, people like Nancy Schley, who's a teaching professor at Rutgers. That is critical and vital, because we are not social workers and things are going to come up. They are going to need guidance as they go along. Unlike a library school intern where I can give advice, I cannot, and I tell the students we cannot, the librarians cannot give advice. We can't do their evaluations at the end of the program either. David also talked about the difference in age groups. That has been a challenge for the libraries, because we have had graduate students who just took the ball and ran with it, many of them in second careers. And then we've had some bachelor's level students who needed more hand-holding. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it is more time intensive. The students do need to be enthusiastic, driven, confident, have the ability to work independently, answer very serious questions. And of course, we would turn to David and Nancy and Dr. Centillo constantly for advice. And some of the challenges that we've seen the social worker interns experience are patrons who latch on tenaciously. They think we're psychologists, we're going to solve their problems. So the social worker has to have the ability to be able to manage that, to explain the limits of what they can do. We have had security issues. We had a patron that would look for one particular student and stay for hours and then follow her out to her car. We had to get Dr. Centillo involved and Nancy at Rutgers to make sure that they were aware, and our library security was involved. So the student had to be walked out to their car every night that she worked, because she did have evening hours. Not that the patron was ever threatening, but the student was uncomfortable enough to come to me, and of course I had to address it. And the other thing David touched on is that people get attached to the interns. We literally have people looking for interns by name, like months and months later they come in, or they start comparing interns. Well, how come this one did this and this one did that? But all in all, we have had a lot of fun with our interns. They came on the road with us. We had a 2-year grant with Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. It was a health literacy grant. They came out with us to a health fair in downtown New Brunswick where everyone spoke Spanish. And Sandra was our intern at the time. And she had a tremendous opportunity to get to talk to large immigrants, largely from Central America. It was all in Spanish. So that
Karen,
was
I hate to interrupt you, but we need to move on to the next slide. Thank you for that, because I think it provides a really good kind of entry point to for the participants to start thinking about how they can initiate these kind of relationships at their own libraries. So when we think about initiating the placement, it's certainly good to give yourself as much time as possible. We're finding that about a 1 year kind of planning 12 months out. So this is not something that, you know, if it's May and you're thinking, wow, it'd be great to have a student in the fall, that it can just kind of be thrown together. This takes a lot of intention, a lot of planning, and we've touched on that a little bit. So if you're thinking about a year out, what you want to do is you want to reach out to your local school of social work. And if you don't know where to find that, if you don't know where one might be in your area, there's a really good website through the Council of Social Work Education. It's cswe.org, and that will list all the accredited MSW and BSW programs in your area, or even online programs. And who you want to reach out to, or I should say the office that you want to reach out to at that school of social work, is the field education office, or sometimes it's called the Practicum office. And the individual that you want to reach out to in that office is usually known as the field director or the social work practicum director. You want to have a conversation with that individual, or perhaps a number of conversations where you can really articulate what your goals are for having a student. And you want to ask them a series of questions, such as what type of students are available? Do you have BSW as well as MSW level students? Are there students with a generalist or a community organizing focus versus students that are more clinically focused, or a student that's planning to become a therapist, essentially? So you want to focus on, you want to really pull from that generalist versus a more specialized student. You want to think about, when do you want this placement to begin? You need to allow time to create an affiliation agreement with the school. So getting all that paperwork ready. You want to understand who is going to be that student's social work supervisor at the university, and then who at your library is going to be the designated task supervisor or library supervisor. You want to think through other logistics that we've mentioned before, having an adequate workspace for the student and making sure that they have the tools that they need to do their job well. So phone, a dedicated computer, and then how documentation, and I'll talk about data collection a little bit, how that's going to be securely stored, especially if they're working with individual patrons. When we think about selecting the student, this is very important. This is not a placement just for any social work student. It's better to not have a student than to just have any student that might end up being a poor fit. As I mentioned earlier, a generalist student, advanced generalist student, or someone with a community organizing focus is ideal versus someone who wants to do therapy with individuals. As Karen mentioned, students, it's ideal for them to have some sort of prior work experience, or at least experience working with individuals who have the kind of needs that you're seeing at your library. It's great if they're familiar with community resources. And also, this is not a placement for a student who just is going to kind of sit back, who needs a lot of direction and hand holding. This is really for students who can take initiative, that are go-getters. And also, we know as librarians that every day is different. We don't necessarily know who's going to walk through our door or what's going to be asked of us. So we need social work students to be flexible and adaptable to a changing environment. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So when we think about increasing chances for successful placements, if you think about yourself as the designated library supervisor, what you want to do is you want to start having discussions with your library staff also well in advance about the reasons why your library or why you want to have a social work student at your library. And then kind of manage and flesh out realistic expectations about what that looks like. And so the rest of the library staff also know who that designated library task supervisor is going to be. You want to let staff know that this is that you will that they can communicate their concerns and questions, and then who to direct questions to about the student, and that is the library task supervisor. When you bring a student on, you really want to allow for space to properly orient that student. So you're introducing them to all library staff as well as security personnel, so that they know who that student is, what their tasks are going to be, and so roles and responsibilities are really clearly defined. Library task supervisors can also work with the student to kind of craft what their activities are going to be at the library. And you want to do this so it's not just beneficial for you, but it's also beneficial for students. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. You want to be able to communicate with the social work practicum or field liaison about any concerns that you have. And Karen touched on this a little bit, and ask them for any additional guidance that you might need. And so you will really need to be proactive in this and really advocating for what you need. You want to have realistic expectations about having a student. They are not professional social workers. So they're not going to be de-escalating potentially violent or high crisis situations. So in that last bullet point, you want to ensure that they're not put into dangerous scenarios. So this is all about proper planning and orientation. This slide kind of reiterates some of the things that I already touched on, but the main thing that I want to say here is you really need to advocate for what you need. So keeping that line of communication open, not just with the School of Social Work, but also with the student. You want to be clear about your goals, and kind of going back to selecting a student, make sure that you're involved in that process of interviewing the student to see if that is a good fit. And the final point here, again, being an advocate for yourself in the library. This is a collaboration between the library, the student, and the school. So like any partnerships that can work really well, you want that constant and open communication between all those stakeholders. And then you want to think about evaluating the placement. How are you going to do that? Some of that is ongoing. So you are providing ongoing feedback to the student about how the placement is going. It's important to be flexible if things need to be tweaked in terms of the student's learning contract. If something just isn't working, or a new need arises, seeing if that can shift, and you would obviously do that in conjunction with the social work supervisor. You want to consider having the student do some data collection. This is anonymized data, which is really just tracking the encounters or the number of encounters that students have with patrons, how many times that or who they refer to in the community, if the student is providing any training sessions for the staff, or they're facilitating any public programs. All of this data and this feedback can really help the library kind of gauge the quality of the placement. The students will also do some self-evaluation as part of their educational requirements as well. And they have a detailed learning plan, I've touched on that a little bit, that they have to complete with the placement. So the library supervisor should really give input to developing that plan. And then also that can be a great tool to kind of assess how the placement is going. I mentioned the handbooks at the beginning of the presentation. I also put the links in the chat, but you can scan these QR codes. And these handbooks, even though we created them for this project in New Jersey, the content here can really apply to most public libraries in the US. So, this is good. We're on time. So we've got about 20 minutes left. We want to open it up to questions that participants have. And so we can have a discussion with the panel as you're crafting your question. We just want to thank you for your participation. If you have further questions or you want more information about this project, you can contact Jennifer Nelson. Her email is in the slides. And of course, we have a bibliography with the key references that we cited in this presentation. So we can open it up. I'm just opening up my chat. And I don't know who's facilitating the
We
Q&A.
do have a couple questions that I
Okay.
collected from the chat.
Great.
First one was from Amber. It's a couple questions. She's asking, where are good places to look for grants or funding so that practicum students doing their placement at libraries can be paid? And then she adds, I've heard that students can be paid for practicums through AmeriCorps or federal work study. Have those sources been used before for library placements that you know of?
I can touch on this. We have student placements across the board, from hospitals to government offices, schools, social service agencies, private for-profit organizations. So that we have had a few AmeriCorps students placed in different settings that match up with their AmeriCorps responsibilities. So it takes some additional coordination, but we have worked with some students, not specifically in library placements, but in other placements. So I think it might be able to be coordinated for a library placement.
For grant funding, I'd suggest local community foundations are probably going to be a good fit. I don't know that for a fact, but given the missions that they tend to have, I think they would be a good option to follow. And certainly your state library is always worth asking.
And that I just wanted to say, and that's exactly how this project was funded, was our state library. Jen Nelson, she helped to facilitate that process. I know it was I believe it was a digital equity grant. So even if you think digital equity, so it doesn't say social work or it doesn't say anything that's close, but if you find something that is like that or related to something that they could possibly do as a social work intern, then it makes sense.
And that was really predicated on the knowledge that to do anything in today's world, you need to know how to use technology. You can't get by very well without basic computer knowledge, phone access, that kind of thing. So that was the genesis behind that.
I just want to say one thing. I don't think lack of funding should stop anyone or any library from participating, because we had, out of all the years that we've done this since 2018, we only had 1 year where we had the funding where we participated in the New Jersey State Library program. So it is a valuable program, and you really are giving back, and it really works two ways. A student, you're giving your time and your staff, and the student is benefiting from the opportunity, and you can't put a price value on that. So you know, if you can't find funding, you should still reach out to your local universities and see if you can develop a partnership. I'm sure they would love to put students out in the field in your library.
Just say something real quick on that. And Karen, thank you for bringing that up. Um, I always think about it this way because I started this whole thing as a social work intern, and I became I became the very first full-time library social worker in the state of New Jersey. And I can tell you this, it's a requirement of the student to actually achieve or complete the practicum. It's part of the requirements for social work. So just you offering the opportunity for them to do that is helping them a great deal. And when you think about it, technically, they're paying the college in order to intern at your library.
Right?
When you think about it.
I second that, David. When I was a student, I didn't get paid either for my field placements, and I did 2 full years in graduate and a year in undergraduate. So
Exactly.
we have another question from Antonia. She says, I would appreciate any speaker's opinion on this. Thoughts on a social work student / social worker on the system level. In New York, many communities are not centrally located to a school of social work and or are rural and not surrounded by many social work organizations. How can social workers play a role in these communities?
I personally love that idea. I see David wants to talk to. Um, I love that idea of having a social work student at a system level, or even in some cases at the state library or at a library, a regional library association, because there are many activities that they could do that would fulfill their learning requirements for their practicum placement that could help to increase the capacity of multiple libraries to address the challenges that they're facing. Then I'll let David.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. So I facilitated a Boston University MSW student she was getting her MSW online. She was living in this area, which is the Jersey Shore area, but she was doing BU. And so, many programs, and Nancy Slade can attest, many programs are now being offered online. So even if you don't have a physical on-campus university close by, the online piece is all over the place.
Yeah, I could just add to that as well. Most schools of social work have an online program where their coursework is online, but their practicum is in person. And it reaches, we're in every state at Rutgers, we're in every state in the nation, we're international with military personnel who are abroad. So even in rural areas, students can can be placed by a university. And also in terms of the type of work that they can do, they can help organize resource lists and manuals to identify places in the community that can provide services. There are many telehealth services that are available. So I think there's, and really there can be some grassroots type of activity and activism in every community. So there's plenty of work to do.
Okay. We have another question from Yvette. What was the timeline for training for library staff and students?
I answered this question in the chat, and hopefully this was the correct answer. This is what you're asking. So the timeline was in the summer of 2023, we met with the library supervisors via Zoom in June, July, and August, because the placements start in September at Rutgers. And then the students we met in late August. We wanted to have more meetings with the students, but they were doing a lot of preparation with a lot of different other groups. But that was the outline. Sorry, that was the timeline for those trainings.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Were they one-day trainings, half-day, hour-long trainings? Just trying to get a sense of how much time
Sure.
is involved.
I believe we did 2 hours for each meeting. So that was a total of 6. And Beth can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It wasn't more than 3. I know that.
Right.
And that seemed to be enough time. We also made ourselves available to the supervisors throughout the summer, because sometimes during trainings, you just have to kind of digest things. And, occasionally they would follow up with us with or questions afterwards, but that seemed to be enough. And we had that handbook already, it's 90% done. So that, it wasn't just the training and then we gave them the handbook at the end. So they had that as a tool throughout the summer. Do I have that correct, Beth? It's been about a year, so.
Yeah, we were developing the handbook while we were doing the trainings because we were
Yeah.
using feedback from the live sessions to inform what we put in the handbook. So I think, if we had it to do over, it would be great at this point to start with the handbook so people can sort of read and take in things themselves, and then we would use the sessions together to reiterate certain things or answer questions. Part of what came out of the evaluation of the project was that the library supervisors did want a little bit more specific guidance about activities students could do. So I think we might, if we could have done it differently, we would try to start with the handbook and then do the sessions. But because of the timeline of the project, we were developing the handbook while we were having the training
Yeah.
sessions.
I can also add that, so in addition to that upfront training, which was excellent for both supervisors and students, I met with students. I participated in the monthly meetings that supervisors had. The attendance at the monthly meetings sort of was a little bit low, so that because library staff, they're busy, they have other responsibilities. So at the beginning, there was a little bit more attendance, and then it's sort of, there were 2 or 3 at those meetings, and we did have the project coordinator, had a new position. But David met with supervisors during the semester. So there's this ongoing, we're not there 24 hours. That's true, and everybody wants support. But there's this ongoing availability, communication, and the sense that we're partnering together. That's really what we wanted to develop, is this partnership.
Yeah, that sounds great. And just one more question. So was the training primarily focused on process and procedure, or did it include some of those topics around mental health and homelessness, and some of the other services that the social work interns were providing?
It included the topics that were in those handbooks. So when Sarah was showing the table of contents from those
Yes.
handouts, so it wasn't, they did receive training on processes and procedures, which
Right.
came from the university, because it was very based on the university. But Sarah and I really spent a lot of time talking more in general about what social workers do in libraries, what this kind of looks like.
Okay.
But our trainings were before students had been selected and before libraries had assigned students. And so, again, there were sort of challenges that one, I like that when Karen was talking about the director's perspective, Karen and her library have hosted students now for many years. And so, Karen has had lots of learning opportunities through each student to kind of get a feel for what students do and what different students can do. For supervisors that were supervising their very first student in this project and had never hosted a social work student before, I think it was a learning curve for everybody trying to figure out like what are realistic expectations and what kind of support do students need. And um, so now I've lost track of your question that you asked. I don't know if I answered it or not, but
You did. You most definitely did. Thank you. Thank you so much. That gave me a lot more insight into what that training looked like and what it included. So thank you.
We do have one more question. Final question is again from Amber, and I feel like it's the $1,000,000 question when you're working with students. Do you have any suggestions for locating a social work supervisor? We had a potential student intern for this fall that fell through because we had not located a licensed social worker to be the student supervisor.
Yeah, I could respond to that. So at Rutgers, we have a team of MSW supervisors that we work with. So that libraries are not the only sites where we want to partner with the organization, but there isn't a social worker at the site. So in those instances, we provide the weekly MSW input. And so we have a pool of social workers that we contract with. We pay them to work with to provide the social work input and perspective to the student. So if your university works differently, every university has a different structure. They may be able to recommend someone if they don't provide that service themselves. There's the National Association of Social Workers is our professional organization, and they often have uh, communication with social workers that might be interested in that type of work.
Mhm.
can I,
May I add to that?
oh,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
can I just offer one other suggestion? So, as Nancy indicated, a lot of schools now at this point do have funds reserved to actually pay for some offsite supervision, and they have supervisors they use. But as this person that asked the question indicated, like there are some schools who do not have that. And in one location where I was working with a library that was looking for an offsite supervisor that was a social work supervisor, they were able to find somebody. So that particular library had a significant group of patrons who had serious mental illness, and they reached out to other agencies in their local area who worked with that particular population and found a social worker there who was really excited about partnering with the library and supervising a social work student. And there was so much overlap in the population served that student actually did they did a few of their hours at that agency, and then the rest of their hours were at the library. And so sometimes if you have a certain, I know not every library has a specific group of patrons that you're trying to address the needs of, but if you do have a group of patrons who are unhoused, or if you have a significant group of patrons who are seniors, or whatever it may be, you might be able to reach out to other organizations serving that group and find a social worker who would be willing to supervise the student.
All right, do we have any final questions? We're down to 3 minutes, folks. Last call.
I just want to add that, first of all, I want to thank everyone for participating. It's great to be here with you. And this is really a cutting edge area of community engagement. Traditional social service organizations, of course, are in place, but this is really an opportunity to be creative, innovative, create partnerships. And it's just been a terrific endeavor. I have learned so much, and it's really been great to work with the library staff.
Yeah, we're getting lots of thank yous here. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for coming on and presenting this very thorough presentation. Like I said, I've been trying to get something going on this topic for a bit now because I've been hearing so much interest around it. So again, thank you all for taking the time to be here for the NNLM and for all of our participants. And thank you all for logging on and being with us today and for all of your questions. So again, thank you. Don't forget to look us up for your next training. And hopefully I will see some of your faces soon next time.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
And thank you, Karen.
Bye.
Tiffany, thanks so much.
Sure, anytime. Thanks so much for participating.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
Really.
it turned out really well. I was
Yeah.
a little worried. I thought maybe I made a